Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.
Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to a new episode of the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. With me today is Paul McLean. Paul is the founder and executive director of the Virginia Minority Cannabis Coalition. Thank you very much for joining me today, Paul.
My pleasure. Been looking forward to it.
All right, before we get started, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. Finally, if you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com. Paul, I always like to start with an easy one. How did you first get involved in the cannabis industry?
Wow. It's been like a 10-year plus journey. I have a couple classmates from college that got into the cannabis industry in California, out west a while back. And as I traveled over the last 10 years, every time I go to California, I make it a point to go see them, check out the business, just to kind of observe and learn. And because I always knew that it was eventually going to come to Virginia at some point, and I wanted to have some idea of what to anticipate, what to expect. And then it's kind of funny because I was a consultant at the time, and I had a client that I was representing on a real estate redevelopment group with the city that we're in. And I had been bringing up cannabis business zoning as a thing that needed to be factored into this whole process, and was told, no, we're not no to cannabis, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then one day I'm on my way to that meeting, and I stop at the 7-Eleven to get a cup of coffee, and I look down at the paper, and it says that the state had just issued the first 5 licenses in the state.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, well, wait a minute. So I started digging and inquiring, ended up talking to local representatives. I eventually ended up talking to the state secretary of agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
And I just started asking a bunch of questions about what I had read in the paper about equity, because I know the history in the state of Black and brown people getting arrested for cannabis possession.
Mm-hmm.
Friends of mine that have dealt with this, for 20 plus years since we've been out of college. And I just asked so many questions, and they realized that I had a different perspective. And I was actually invited to participate in the work group process for the governor at that time, the past governor. And I got involved with that process. And since then, I have been involved and have just gotten more and more involved, getting down into the granular levels of working in the community to empower and educate people of what's coming.
So was it the work with the governor's office that led to establishing the coalition?
Yes, it was. Because in all these conversations that we were having, and every time we had these meetings, which were twice a month, I believe, sometimes more often, but there were about 20 to 25 people that worked for state agency, ran state agency, and equity was never being discussed in terms of what it should look like, how it can be implemented, what is truly fair, what can be built upon, as a foundation. And so I realized there wasn't anyone really in that environment, in that room with that perspective. And that's why I created the coalition, to have a voice for the people that weren't in that room.
What were some of the things that you were looking for in terms of equity?
The main thing, man, in our view, equity is just true opportunity to be included.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the main industries in the state of Virginia, none of them have ever incorporated the Black and brown communities, but all of them have significant employment of Black and brown people in all those industries.
Mm-hmm.
So the main thing that we view in terms of equity is true inclusion. Now, what does that look like? It's understanding that a lot of the people that might qualify for what a lot of people consider to be an equity qualification, there's a multitude of ways that states are doing that. I won't dive into that rabbit hole, but it mainly needs to involve understanding the position that the person is coming from. Okay. Mm-hmm. There's in politics in the South,
mm-hmm.
Color of skin is used to justify some silly stuff, and has mm-hmm. been over years. Some people have gravitated towards that. Some people have realized this is kind of insane what we're talking about. However, that mechanism of exclusion is hard to break because it's hard to just say, okay, we want to include this group of people that might not have been involved in the railroad industry, the poultry industry, the fishing industry, the shipyard, all of the civil contracts and military-based contracts. Minorities are not typically included in that. But with the state having such a history and a documented history from their own research of showing that in the state of Virginia, if more white people get arrested for cannabis possession in the state, it's a mathematical, guarantee because of the population. However, the numbers show that if you are black or brown, you are 4 times more likely to serve time for cannabis possession.
Oh, wow.
That right there. So when we're talking about equity, understanding that some of the people that may want to pursue this already have a college degree. Mm-hmm. They've gotten it. They haven't had an opportunity to use that degree because of the cannabis charge. Some of these people already have business experience, or they have family members that have business experience, and they want to come into this space as a family unit in a family-owned business. Equity would be understanding that typically small black businesses and brown businesses don't get access to capital. Mm-hmm. Because the capital that you can get is based on the assets you have right now. So if you're already starting from a job position where you're working check to check, making your $60,000 a year, and a lot of people would say that's great. But if that's 60 grand for a household, that's very different than 2 parents making 60 grand a year.
Right.
So when we're talking about equity, man, we're talking about access to capital. We're talking about access to professional support. Mm-hmm. Because any small business goes out of business real quick when you don't have a bookkeeper, an accountant, and an attorney. Mm-hmm. Because one bad day of business can cost you your business. So that support and professionals willing to work with people that are coming from this position. And another thing in terms of equity is in terms of exposure in the market. And here's what I mean. For a lot of things that I've read from a lot of different states about how people in cities and villages have tried to implement equity, a lot of times there's kind of like geotagging. Well, you live over here, where you can do business over here. Well, in the state of Virginia, if you looked at it as this paper, majority of minorities live over here. Mm-hmm. Majority of agriculture is over here. You see what I'm saying? So a person that may live near the coast where I do should have an opportunity, if they want to go outside of where all the competition is, to be able to equitably open a business on the western side of the state without hassle. Mm-hmm. Because that's giving the person free market access. If you're good at business, you will be successful. If you suck at business, you will go out of businesses like frozen yogurt shops, barber shops, and everything else. But if you don't ever get included, man, you can't even get in the game if you can't get into the stadium, regardless if you got a ticket or not. You got to get in there. And unfortunately, financial resources and business resources don't typically factor in people coming from disenfranchised positions because they're just starting with more challenge. And it's unfortunate, but it's the world we live in, but it doesn't necessarily have to stay that way. And in regards to equity in cannabis, the way we view it is in the state of Virginia right now, there really is no established framed market. You know what I'm saying? It's just medical, and we only have half of that done because of how the legislative process went back in January and February. But going forward, the industry and equity, there's no reason why something that does not exist cannot include everyone.
Right.
For someone to say, no, we shouldn't do that right now is insane because it doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. So you're telling me I can't get a piece of something down the road?
Right.
What would be the rationale for that?
Right.
And there really isn't one. So that's how we view it, man. Make the broad stroke of inclusion, just like if a person that was not coming from that position or having that background wanted to open up a frozen yogurt shop.
Right.
Or car dealership, So being able to actually be included without the obstacles that typically exclude people. High fees, massive requirements for assets in order to get funding. So you got to have $500,000 worth of assets to borrow $200,000 from us.
Right.
Okay. I failed to mention my background. I was a banker for 11 years. I sold money for a long time. So I've seen both sides of the situation. Right. And that's why I truly believe that when it comes to equity, man, Virginia has the unique opportunity. If they do this right, they can become an equity business leader in the South. Kind of like Atlanta became an inclusion example as a city 25 years ago with Maynard Jackson. But we're talking about an entire state, because if you look at the population of 8.5 million people, we have 20 plus military bases here. I think we have like 17 major universities. There's a lot. There's a lot of opportunity to educate people how to get into this industry, because it's agriculture, but it's also business, just straight business. And we want to make sure that the people that have been serving time have an opportunity, and their families have an opportunity to tap into what they've been serving time for.
Understood. What does the state of Virginia have to do to make sure they get it right?
First, I'll say stop doing what they've been doing.
Yeah.
That's a big issue. You have a lot, cannabis as an industry, everyone knows what it is, whether you've been a consumer or not, okay? People know whether you say weed, reefer, pot, they got an idea of what it is. The unfortunate thing is that honesty, transparency, and reality need to converge in this space. Here's what I mean. A lot of politicians that I've talked to, they act like they have no idea at all what cannabis does to the body, meaning like they've never consumed cannabis at all. So I've talked to some politicians, and the way they describe cannabis, you would think they were describing heroin or meth or something like that.
Right.
So, I've never known anyone to be violent after consuming cannabis. Alcohol is a very different thing, and alcohol's right across the street from me. There's a convenience store right across the street. So, Virginia needs to understand what the cannabis culture is and how it is different. That's one of the biggest things I've found, because if they can't grasp that, it makes it hard to have some of the other conversations that are very relevant and real. Because if I'll give you an example. I talked to a person that in the state of Virginia, alcohol is controlled by the state, and it's all sold in state-run liquor stores called ABC, Alcohol Beverage Control. Okay. And I had someone explaining to me that the ABC store should be where you go buy cannabis, because it's all the same. Every grower, every person will have an opportunity to compete, because their product would be able to be sold on shelves, blah, 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 blah. And they just viewed it as, okay, the ABC store is the sin store. You go get your alcohol, your wine, your weed, any of the sin products. We're just going to sell them all in that place. What I realized having these conversations, in this particular one, either they were lying to my face, which is possible, or they have a very unrealistic view of the cannabis community. It is very different than your hard drinking at the bar, sports bar, slamming 5 or 6 beers 4 or 5 times a week, your local watering hole. Very different community. And it's hard to put framework on the industry when you think everyone walking around is a voluntary drug addict. You know what I'm saying? They're not understanding that our state has a high number of vets, retired vets, because of all the military presence. A lot of these politicians don't understand how many vets I've met with that grow their own cannabis, consume cannabis daily, mainly because they don't like the pills that get prescribed to them.
Right.
They don't like feeling loopy. A lot of the medications that they want to prescribe have long-term health detrimental impact. So they're pro-cannabis. They want to grow cannabis, but their local politician is like, no, that's the devil's hay. You should be without that. So if you can't regulate something if you think that it's going to destroy society, because they didn't seem to have a problem going from illegal alcohol. You telling me Jack Daniels started making whiskey the day Prohibition started? No, that was around for a while. So why can't those same principles be applied here? Right. So the state really has to view that. The other thing that they need to get right on the most fundamental level, man, the optics. Mm-hmm. The optics of a room of middle-aged white men saying young black men who they have made money off of. And when I say that, people get offended and don't understand. If you go back and you research and look at political ads over the last 30 years, whenever crime is talked about, it is not a white face. Mm-hmm. The B-roll ads, whether it's local, state, or presidential election, when you look at how people talk about crime and they show video, it's that image. And that image is tied to a lot of nonsense. And now with cannabis legalization, in order for the state to get it right, they got to overcome a lot of the obstacles they created because of how they've done politics.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? So there's a lot of leveling up and transparency that needs to happen. And I also see that there may need to be a come to cannabis moment, for lack of a better term, for some of these politicians. And here's what I mean. For a state to drag out a solid process for legalization that can be amended and improved on an annual or semi-annual basis so that it always is agile in the industry to compete with the surrounding markets makes total sense. However, the state is most likely not going to do that because there's politicians that feel the devil hay argument is so strong, but they're not realizing, this is why I'm talking about this turnover. They're not realizing when I go to the community in Northern Virginia and I'm talking to people sitting in restaurants and sitting in living rooms talking to people, they're talking about my local politician. I can't get them on the phone and they don't represent my interests. I want a dispensary in my city, in my town, in my part of town. But I've heard people say, no one wants it. I'm like, no, that's not matching up. Mm-hmm. So they have to understand that if you don't really listen to and communicate with the people that are actually back home, it could be very detrimental. And I think has a lot to do with why Virginia is in such a jeopardized position now. The way things fell apart legislatively at the beginning of this year, and we have we had an election last year, got a new governor, and we have another election this year for the other half of the state government. Mm-hmm. So this is an opportunity to do things right, decent and in order. And if they do it right by paying attention to the optics, you talking about things in these broad statements like all of this is bad and no one should have this. Like there's a politician going around saying this is the most offensive thing. To talk about equity should be called to give a criminal a corporation program.
Oh, geez.
You understand just how offensive that is when you look at the Kennedy family? They didn't just wake up into politics. There were some things going on. You know what I'm saying? It's like, how can you say that when you look at people that have served years for white collar crime and then they're allowed to just go right back to, living their life?
Yeah, I don't think they workshop that title very well.
No, I agree with you. But that's the kind of stuff. And that's the kind of stuff that, the optics of that it squashes the opportunity for dialogue, and there needs to be a lot more dialogue.
For that dialogue, you talk about a problem understanding cannabis culture. Is the gateway to understanding cannabis culture is getting them on board, understanding the economics behind a cannabis economy? You know, once they see the light of the money, maybe it could kind of draw them into the culture?
No, the money is the problem.
Okay.
And here's why I say this. In our culture in America, the way people typically learn about the quote unquote drug business is through movies and television. Okay. And in movies and television, the drug business is always portrayed as being very, very lucrative. Okay. And you can make a ton of money. You see Narcos, you see, I forgot the series that 50 Cent did on Stars, but you see all these shows, right? And so people out here in the community and politicians also, they see this is the media education of what the drug industry is like. And they see all this money and they feel like, okay, there's so much money in this. We need to tax, and we need to just tax everything because there's so much money. So 30% tax for this and tax for that and tax for this. What they're not realizing, the reason why that guy that is doing the illegal hustling can have 7 Ferraris and houses all over the place, because that dude doesn't have to pay taxes. That dude's not having to pay for transportation costs and banking fees and the type of stuff that a traditional business would have to do, especially in the cannabis space. So that I think the money sometimes clouds people's rational thought for just understanding what they're trying to work on, because they're so worried about trying to get to the money that they're not realizing that they're creating all these extra barriers, and that just creates more problems. And perfect example, I am on the CURB board for the state of Virginia. CERB stands for Cannabis Equity Reinvestment Board. We're the third board for the state. And what we're tasked with is if the industry opened up like it was supposed to, after the first year, 30% of the tax revenue goes into a fund that this committee has and they have access to this fund every year to reallocate that money into the community to empower and bolster the Black and brown communities in areas where the war on drugs and cannabis prohibition has done so much harm. Well, in this legislative session that pretty much fell apart, there was a particular politician and a couple of his, I guess you could say his wingmen, that they said we need to take that money away. And we need to put that in the general fund, which already is stacked full. So right there, that's an opportunity to put that money back into the community. And when people bring up that give a criminal a corporation, that's what they're talking about. The thing when they say that, they're not realizing is, honestly, man, if a lot of Republicans really understood how unique of a position this is for Virginia, some of them would really wake up, because it comes down to this. This is an easy way to describe it. As I was saying earlier, politically, the Black and brown community have been, the ones shamed and blamed for crime, issues, blah, 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 all of that kind of stuff. Now, let's say that is the case, or that was the case, okay? Well, if you have that segment of the population now that as a community is saying, hey, look, the past is the past. We want to move forward too. We want to be included in this new industry too. Why? So we can be more of a contributing member of society. But we actually have politicians that are saying that's bad. Now, this is the way we view it. If, let's say, I'm just pulling a number out the air. Okay, let's say that we account for 20% of the state population, Black people. Okay. And if the Black community and the crime associated with the community, the lack of education in the community, if all of that stuff is what has been pulling on the purse strings of the state government, why the hell would you not include those people in an opportunity that they want to be included in to double, triple, quadruple their income and family household income to where they can be a contributing member of your state society, be gainfully employed, pay more taxes, which is what politicians want, And that tax revenue, increased tax revenue, goes into a separate pool that now you have money for more teachers. You have money for more police officers, more firefighters, and those civil servants that protect the rest of society. How does it hurt the state in any way, including the people that have been disenfranchised? It does not economically. And what was so crazy is I was at you can tell this has been a nail in my side. It has bothered the heck out of me. I was at a regional chamber of commerce event last year, and one of the keynote speakers was an economist from a local university that's an advisor to the last 4 or 5 governors, I believe. And he talked about the economic study they had done that year. And I tracked him down when he got off stage out in the lobby and pulled him aside and talked to him and asked him, I didn't hear cannabis mentioned in your report at all. This was 2021. And I'm curious, are you not including that, not factoring that? He said, no, we had that in last year's report. Shocked the hell out of me. I was like, okay, I'll go track that down. So then I asked him on the spot right there, did your report factor in the impact of the Black and brown community being economically factored in and what that would do to the overall economic spike across the state? Eyes popped out of his head. No, we didn't even consider that. That was very telling, because this person is directly talking to the politicians that are currently factoring in everything economically for the state. And in that conversation, I realized Black and brown people weren't even being considered, but they're being asked to do all of this change and change their life and move here and do this, but they're not being considered economically in the big picture. That made me realize that stuff like we're doing now and what the coalition is doing is needed, but it also made me realize that there's a lot of need for educators, for education of politicians about what's really going on. The unfortunate thing that I found, David, is that many of them just flat out don't want to have those conversations because it really...
Why not?
Because their constituents don't look like me. You know what I'm saying? The people that look like me that are in their voting base don't make a difference, don't move the needle.
Okay.
And I had someone in politics share with me back in January, which kind of knocked me back on my heels. Because we were sitting around at the end of a day talking to a bunch of politicians, and I asked if we could get all the politicians together in an informal, private setting, no cameras, anything, do you think we could have some dialogue that would make a difference? And thought about it a while, and he's like, probably not, because you have a segment of government that have a lot of influence on other politicians in the state, and they don't want to see cannabis being a conversation topic that people can agree on and talk about.
Okay.
That combativeness keeps people in office. You know, and I think a lot of Virginians are starting to see that. They're starting, regardless of their race, economic level, where they are in the state, location wise, they're starting to see stuff I've been talking to my politician about this tax on this and this tax on that and how the school is this and all this stuff. They're starting to realize these people really aren't doing anything that we've been talking about for the last 8 years.
Right.
And if you've been in office 12 years and we haven't accomplished the stuff we talked about the first year, why do we actually need you there? And I think the community is starting to have that thought process because cannabis is a unifying thing for people that consume cannabis, regardless of their reason, regardless of their race, age, location, economic level. Cannabis as a product that is consumed is creating dialogue between people that would not have that dialogue before because it's about something that they have in common, which is the plant. Right. I've seen people have conversations in the dispensary, and it's like, wow, I never would have thought that dude and that dude would sit there and be talking, and they're walking to their car talking about this young guy, this young black kid. I say kid, I'm 50. He was about 27, 28, suffered from MS. And he was talking about how he liked to consume and how he was explaining to this older Caucasian gentleman that was 65 plus how to roll a joint and how there's joint rolling machines because he had arthritis and he didn't like edibles and stuff like that. So see, that type of dialogue would never happen in a Walgreens. It's never happened at the grocery store.
Yeah.
But because cannabis as a product has such a unifying impact on people, I think that is what is going to bring about more people in the community trying to pull politicians into the right conversations by holding their feet to the fire. Because I don't know if you know about Virginia, man, but in 2019, the legacy market, the illegal market was $2.1 billion.
Wow.
Last year, it grew to 3.2.
Wow.
That's a lot of growth, right?
Yeah.
Now, this when I had a politician give me their take on that spike, it kind of grabbed me like, okay, this is where my mind started thinking education. This particular individual, or these individuals, believe that the reason the illegal market went and grew by $1 billion is because the cannabis consumers in the state that are already existing cannabis, just started consuming more cannabis because it was becoming legal.
$1 billion more cannabis?
Exactly. So for a person to say, I'm like, do you understand what you're actually saying? So that's like every person is now smoking or consuming 1/3 more, 30% more than they were satisfied with consuming for their needs. That's not realistic.
Yeah.
But they couldn't process that $1 billion spike is because you got these grandmas and these other people that have been no, it's illegal, that are now saying, yeah, I went and got a medical card. Or they live so far from a dispensary. I know of a grandmother that knew her grandchild who was in college smoked reefer, as she called it. And the dispensary is like 2.5 hours from her house. So what she asked is, hey, grandson, can you talk to that little friend of yours and see if he can get me some of that reefer? Because, my doctor said I need to try and get this, but I don't want to drive.
Right.
And the grandson hooks the grandma up. And now the grandma is buying from the illegal market, but all grandma knows is she doesn't have sciatica pain and have, anxiety issues and sleep issues like she was having before. And her grandson just goes to get her medicine. She's not realizing she's supporting the illegal market. All she knows is she feels better. And politicians don't realize that stalling this makes that market grow even more. Because that grandma, when she's sitting around in her, what do you call that thing that they do? Crochet? Crochet club. And they say, hey, you look like you're walking better. You're getting up better. Yeah, I started using marijuana, She ends up engaging in a conversation with some other ladies. Naturally, some of them are like, no, the devil's hay. And others are like, where did you get it? There's none of those stores near us. And how did you get it? And blah, blah, blah. So grandma said, my son, you're my grandson. And next thing you know, grows by $1 billion.
Well, and also when it opens up on the medical side, there is this sort of sense that it is legal in a sense. And so people are looking to reach out into the illegal market because even though it's legal medicinally, it feels like the floodgates have been opened, so to speak. And people have, those normal like barriers to entry that
they're not worried anymore.
Exactly.
Because it's on the news every day. It's in the paper. You got these CBD shops popping up all over the place with these neon signs. That's a whole nother conversation. I'm so insulted by that. But they start to see, and it's like, oh, it's not as big of a deal. And they hear about other states and cannabis events and people smoking on the state capitol and all this stuff. It's like, oh, it's becoming more normal. I don't have to worry and hide about the stigma.
So how, by empowering Black and brown communities, is your goal, having more Black and brown shareholders to bring more people from the community to the table?
Yes, in a lot of ways it is, because in working on this for 2+ years, a lot of people in the Black and brown community have a serious issue trying to trust something that has anything to do with the government.
Understood.
And because they've trusted public defenders, and their child or brother or sister still ends up going to jail because the public defender didn't care enough to actually prepare. You know, they've trusted teachers, they've trusted police officers, they've trusted as a child. So what we see is, by being able to get the first person in the door, it creates a sense of, okay, it's possible and it's doable, and this is how it can be done. And that's why with our organization, we are not just focused on trying to help people become business owners like dispensary owners and cultivators. That's one silo of activity. But outside of that, we want people to understand that each one of those business models have dozens of smaller businesses that they can access without putting up $1 million and without having to leverage their home to be able to participate in this industry. But if they don't see people that look like them, even if they're in other parts of the country, it makes it hard to believe that you can get into this space when, if you look at this stack of cannabis publications that I have, I probably got a stack of 100 on this conference table here. If you lay them all out, you see like Black and brown faces on 5 covers. You know, and when people see that, they're like, wait a minute, but how is my cousin in jail and my nephew's in jail? But they don't see that representation. So that's why I think helping us get in there, but then after that, understanding that that's just the beginning, because there needs to be more people involved in the industry, in the ancillary businesses, employment, management, supervising, all the way down to entry-level bud tenders. It is an industry that is brand new, has no established, framework. Our belief as an organization is cannabis in Virginia the aesthetics of it won't be equitable until Black and brown people represent about 33% of the industry. And we're not talking about quotas or giving things to people. If you look at the thing that you can always use is you can use prison numbers. And the amazing thing is, I was just talking to one of my associates who's speaking at our event on Saturday. The state has started removing prison numbers from the state websites, which is very eye-opening because the numbers were so blatantly just out of sync with society. You see what I mean? So as people in the community see more examples of success on a grassroots local level, I think that will be the biggest factor for more people wanting to seek inclusion. And what we believe is we already need to be included before the people want to start seeking inclusion. And that's going to start with politics, man, and really pressuring politicians to give a damn.
Do you have political aspirations?
None.
No? Don't want to jump into that game?
I don't have the tolerance for bullshit for politics.
Yeah?
I really don't. I am a guy that I have family members back home that have been in politics and friends from college in politics, and they got a lot more patience than I do. And I believe that I can be more impactful where I am, being the guy in between the politician and the guy in the community. Kind of like the translator or the Sherpa into this cannabis space, a tour guide into cannabis economics and entrepreneurship. That's really what my role is in this overall, is to kind of be a tour guide and say, okay, this is how we're going. This is where you go. This is where you can get off right here. This is what you've been looking for. Capitalize on it. Because a lot of folks I've talked to just don't know how to capitalize on what's out there. And that's what we want to help them to do. So if I get involved in politics, and I've had a ton of friends try to tell me I should be, I just don't think I can make as much of an impact there. And I really think that I can be more of an impact being the guy to fight with the politicians, to say, hey, I'm shining the spotlight. See what he just did? You need to pay attention to that. This is how you take action on what that politician did. This is how you pick up the phone. This is what you say. This is how you have your views recorded for that politician that's representing your community in the state legislature.
When you talk about building a framework, have you reached out to similar coalitions or efforts in other states to try and help advance the agenda?
Yeah, I have. I've spoken to a lot of folks in like California, Southern California, Oakland, Illinois, out in Washington, out in Denver, talking to find out what they've tried, what has worked and not worked. A lot of the things that haven't worked have been pretty consistent in a lot of places. It usually falls in the lap of politics in some way, shape, or form. And that's the thing. In a lot of minority organizations say we got to fix education first. Then we got to do the steps, blah, 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 then the home, all this. Our view is we need to get the money first. We need to get the businesses first, because once you have business and you have business owners that employ people that impact tax revenue, whether it's payroll taxes or property taxes, politicians start to pay attention because you impact what they need, which is money to run for office again. So once you have the central economic strength, then politicians will listen to you a lot more. And it's not really a benefit to some politicians in parts of the state to not listen, because listening to those constituents isn't going to do anything for them. You see what I mean? And everybody's got 24 hours in a day in the same 365. So I get that. That's why we're trying to make the Black and brown community even more relevant to politics by getting people engaged and politically savvy to understand how the game is being played so they can actually participate.
When you talk to representatives from other states, what's working?
The biggest example I've seen is some guys that I met when I was out in Las Vegas at MJ BizCon last year. And they were from Oakland, and we were talking about money. And we were talking about funding, because all of them had gotten licenses in different aspects of the cannabis space out there. And it was 3 people I was talking to, and they knew my background was in financing and money. And so they were asking me questions, and I'm asking them questions, that type of dialogue. And I asked them, how long had they been trying to get funding? And they all responded, years. And I asked, well, what changed in the last few months that made it more accessible? I was completely floored. They said that they got grant funds from the local city.
Oh.
Like 20, 25 grand. Not a ton of money. But this one cat was explaining to me, when he kept going to investors and having sit downs, when they found out he had no capital to start with, they were basically saying, well, we'll do this for you, giving him a shitty offer. This is if you accept this, we're going to put you in this position, blah, blah, blah. It's not going to be the greatest because you got nothing to bring to the table, blah, blah, blah. He said that when he got that money from the city, and when they asked, well, do you have money? He's like, yeah, I got some money to start up. It changed the dialogue, because they realized they weren't going to have as much control over his decision making. Because if he already had 25 or whatever it was put aside, that makes it easier for him to go talk to other low-level investors. They got 50 grand, 100 grand, 200 grand, in their community, where they're able to say, hey, look, I've already spoken to Mr. So-and-so. I got this from the city. I've spoken to this church. They've given me money. I've spoken to this funeral home company. They've given me some money. And then when they talk to that investor, it's like, well, I've already started making money. I'm coming to you for additional money. I think that's been one of the biggest things to change the leverage in the negotiating for future growth. Because a lot of people will take a deal that's like 5 years with that investor, but the back end of it, if they do real well after the midway point, there's no upside for them. You know what I'm saying? The additional money is going over there rather than coming back into that business, or coming into that company so they can open up another location and that kind of thing. So I think pooling of money has been one of the best things, and it's private, like from a private equity firm or something like that, or a private individual, public from the local, and public from the state. Those three things contributing funds at different stages of the business growth process can help springboard them forward. Rather than, like a lot of people do, they want to go to an investor and say, okay, I want to get into cultivation. This is what I need. I need $3 million right now. Mm-hmm. And that person is separating from that money. And it's like, but what if it could be separating from 50 grand, and then you got that established knowing that you have the next 500 lined up already? You see what I mean? Pooling of capital, I think, is one of the best things that places have started to do right. The other thing is, and not as many places have done this or are willing to do it, is just starting out with equity being included, because going back and trying to add it, you look like an idiot. Mm-hmm. It's like, why didn't you include these people before? So why are you doing it now? That's a whole dialogue that everyone should want to avoid, because there's not a lot of positivity that can come out of that. You see what I mean? Another thing, though, is when it comes to money and those kinds of things that places have done right, is having a mechanism built into the legislative or lawmaking or framework to the industry making process, where it's reviewed and updated. Mm-hmm. Because we're talking about an industry, man, that is so brand new on a national level, you can't even really call it ground floor. Mm-hmm. We only have a certain percentage of states participating, and all those states aren't even fully vested in everything that's possible. So it's like, what we're doing right now is we're building gas stations, and people don't know what a car is.
Okay.
You see what I mean? So we're trying to educate people. This is what the car is going to look like, and this is how you get prepared with the gas station. Mm-hmm. And if the politicians in the cities and the communities kind of viewed it from that approach, it can be a good thing for everyone, because there's more than enough money, man. There's more than enough money. The only time the scarcity of funds is going to come into place in this cannabis space is when the big conglomerate corporations are allowed to come in, and mom and pop got to compete against Jack Daniels. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Or compete against Walmart, Altria, because this is the tobacco state. You know, mm-hmm. Virginia's got a long history. And the last thing I'll say on that, man, in terms of doing right, because this kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier too, specifically about Virginia. When you ask me about what can Virginia do differently to kind of set themselves apart, if they just do the industry right and create real opportunity for people. So instead of having like a city like Atlanta, you could have a state like Virginia to blossom and grow economically. That puts the state of Virginia in a place for the first time to actively be engaging the conversations that have been avoided for so long, for 400 plus years. And it opens up a whole new dialogue of, okay, we want to turn the corner and start to move forward with this new Virginia and what we're trying to do. Not everybody's willing to do that, because some people like the old.
Right.
But if it's done correctly, man, I think it can be very impactful, because if you look at the surrounding states around us, everyone's kind of watching. Mm-hmm. So
is part of the answer? Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Is part of the answer like they're doing in New York State, where a percentage of licenses are, earmarked for social justice and social equity businesses?
I say yes and no. And here's what I mean. Yes, it's good to have guaranteed framed inclusion, but it's all about achieving that percentage. And here's what I mean by that. If that percentage has to be achieved first year, you're going to give licenses to everybody that you need to, because you're trying to satisfy a number. Okay. Versus getting to that percentage or whatever it is based on having solid quality business ideas and concepts. Equity applicants can do that too. It's just, you got to let the people know what the framework and what you're looking for. So I think that's a big thing, because I think sometimes states are in such a rush to satisfy consumer demand and the perceived perception that they don't always think those things through, because doing that now, and they do that for 3 years, it may be great. But 7 years from now, there may be some scientific evolution in cannabis research, which changes the whole dynamic of the industry, and the cannabis space for that state needs to be able to pivot to always be relevant. So someone that just has deeper pockets for the new pivoted relevant thing can't just come in, okay, we're taking over all of this. Just like if you look at how the significance of cell phones going from analog to digital.
Right.
Changing it. I was in the industry at the time and I saw that industry flip. And I was like, man, I don't know what the hell this digital is, but people aren't ever going back to those analog phones. And now look at us. People are like, analog phone. It's like never going back. So we believe that this can be very similar, but it's got to be done right.
What is it about the CBD market that has recently sprung up in Virginia that you find insulting?
Man, I've sat outside some of these places and I've watched teenagers with high school stickers in their window walk into the store, buy product. Some of them are selling illegal cannabis. Some of them are selling, because one of our boot campers went into one of these places trying to pick up some rolling papers. And the guy, when he started he was buying rolling papers, the guy was like, are you looking for something to fill that? And we've educated our boot campers about this space. They're very educated about the industry. And so he's curious now. He's like, what do you mean? The guy kept saying, I got what you need to fill that. So my boot camper kept asking, so you got weed? And this guy was like, it'll get you high. He kept asking, is that weed? And the guy would not say yes or no. He just kept emphasizing, it'll get you high. Okay. That right there, you don't give a damn about the consumer. Okay. Right. A lot of these shops have gotten caught for selling product that is not even humanly consumable. They've had a couple organizations have done some secret shopper investigative things. And they went into this one place and they were selling pre-rolls. They took the pre-roll back to the lab, tested it. The pre-roll was filled with shredded paper that had been sprayed with Delta 9.
Oh, geez.
It wasn't even a plant. It was paper.
Oh my goodness. And
they had rolled it, packaged it, and were selling it.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? That kind of stuff. It is, and in our state of Virginia, it's completely unregulated.
Yeah.
There's no inspectors. It operates in a gray space that's currently going on. So these places are popping up all over the place and they're gaudy as hell. I just did an experiment the other day driving down one of the major boulevards in the city next to me. On this one boulevard that is like 170 something blocks, there's like 20 something of these places.
Oh.
Most of them are within 1,000 feet of a church, school, daycare center, police station, hospital, fire department. I mean, one of them is right. If you come out the door of this place and look over your right shoulder, you can see the school.
Yeah.
And so, young people are going into these places, buying what they think is weed because, hey, they want to be cool. I can't get in a dispensary. So the fact that there's no regulation really on them, no monitoring of them is really concerning, because when you hear the politicians bring up health issues from people consuming some sort of hemp-related or cannabis-related plant or product, it's never somebody taking a bud, putting it in a grinder, rolling a J. It's not that. It's somebody that went into a store and they bought something. Like there was a grandmother that I recently learned about. She bought what she was thinking was CBD muscle relaxant ointment. And it had like 74% THC or something crazy like that.
Oh, wow.
And the lady ended up hallucinating and having sickness. She had no idea. Well, they end up tracking the product, testing the product. These people that were making it weren't even supposed to be making the product. And she bought, this is the key thing, she bought the product from a gas station. And because people think, oh, it's legal now, I can buy CBD anywhere. So you go into the CBD shop and they're selling tires, and over there they got a little CBD stand. Just the other day, I was driving down the street and I pulled over in the middle of the street, took a picture because I have a picture on my phone of a pawn shop. And on the sign, it says, we carry adult Delta 8 and Delta 9 products. Yeah. That's why I have a problem with these places, man. It's not regulated, and it's creating a sense of consumer comfort that is impacting people's health. And a lot of young people, I was young, I did a lot of dumb stuff. And I guarantee you, if some of those young people were smoking paper, they did not realize they were smoking paper. They probably, it's just really strong weed.
Yeah.
No, man, you're inhaling carcinogens.
Yeah.
At 16 years old.
Yeah. I mean, that's just vile that they were doing that.
Yes, but that's part of that. We've had politicians get in front of a camera this year talking about Virginia is a right state to offer Delta 8 and Delta 9. It's like, okay. So then when he gets away from the camera, people are asking, do you know what that means? No, not really. But he told me to say it. And the person who he's pointing to, the hemp grower.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So,
yeah.
And education is real important, but that's why I have an issue with them. It's just not regulated. And the other thing is where they're located. They're not located in Virginia Beach down on Laskin Road. Okay, we're $500,000 to $2 million houses. They're putting these stores where the black and brown people live. And then I can go there and buy my blunt paper, blah, 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 blah. And then they offer up other products, and because it's not regulated, that's a big issue, man. That's a big issue.
You mentioned boot campers. What are your boot campers?
Okay. The first event that we did was last year. We did a 5-week boot camp. And it's for people that wanted to pursue being a business owner in the industry, mainly focused on dispensary and cultivation. But it was a 2-part course that was 5 weeks. It was 5 consecutive Saturdays where we got together face to face, belly to belly, and we did activities and exercises that built on the online video modules that they were doing. They had 22 hours of video content that they had to watch, take quizzes on, and take tests on at these certain benchmarks to keep pace with what we were doing on Saturday. And then at the end of that process, the whole purpose of the boot camp is for people to figure out where they want to be in the cannabis space as a business owner. And then once they figure that out by week 2, then we start helping them to shape out their business idea in that particular pathway. So, then after they finished that portion of it, the next phase was business plan writing. So we had a platform in place where everyone started working on their business plan, and now they're finishing that up. And this Saturday, at this Saturday's event, they will actually be publicly talking about their business ideas and as a panel discussion. And that's how we're going to close out this movement meeting on Saturday. But it all started to give people a leg up and a crash course on everything cannabis, kind of covering what I've been studying and learning over the last decade. Yeah. And just pushed it down their throat.
Well, that's what I like about that is it's actionable. It's structured. There's a clear goal that they're working towards and trying to figure out what that role in the cannabis industry is. Because I think sometimes when we talk about what could be done, people still don't know how to get started.
And that was what I realized. I'm a child of 2 entrepreneurs. And I started my first business when I was 14. I had a business when I was in college, and that business prevented me from having to go work when I came out of college. So there were a lot of things that I just learned how to do over the course of my life that I thought were just natural. And as I got out of here and got away from corporate America, I started to find, no, it's not. A lot of people don't know how to do that. So that's why the coalition was created, because the way I view it is, man, I'm creating doorways and pathways and on-ramps, and then shining the light on it and saying, this is how you stay in the lane and this is how you can do it. Once you get there, you got to be a good business person. If you're a crappy person with poor character and you don't have discipline to save, as a business, you're going to have issues. But that doesn't matter if you're selling legally or illegally. Doesn't matter if you're a car dealership or a cannabis owner. Business is business. And so, I realized that kind of acting as that tour guide, like I was talking about, allowed me to kind of connect people with the resources they needed so that they can keep moving with the group. Because I got a mentor that used to say all the time, I haven't spoken to him in a while. His name is Chris Oliver. He used to have this saying, and he said it was easier to run with 1,000 people in the direction I'm going than carry one person on my back.
Oh, very good.
So we're looking for the 1,000 people that understand the opportunity here and want to get in where they can fit in. And because we're not trying to carry anyone, but politicians try to make it seem like we're trying to carry people. You see what I mean? No, I can run with 1,000 people. It's enough for me just getting to the finish line. So that's kind of how it has all evolved, and how the boot camp just spun off all these other things, because the boot campers continue. We do a Sunday night call regularly, and they plug in. We are in a regular communication, and we want to have more people across the state in this group, in this cohort of people that understand that now that you've learned how to learn business, go out there and learn everything you can. Check back with me when you need help. But now you know how to go get the information you need, seize the opportunity so you can secure your position at the table. And that's what this is about.
Well, Paul, it's really inspiring work that you've been doing. And I mean, if it's not 1,000 yet, it certainly sounds like you're getting more and more people to run with you.
Trying.
Well, before we get out of here, is there anything else that you want to make sure the Cannabis Equipment News audience knows about your work with VMCC?
I would just say a couple things. We have a lot of events coming up. If you're ever in the Virginia market, check in on our website. Our website is vmccequity.org. We just had a local event, not our organization, but one organization we just recently got connected with. I don't know if you guys have heard of the concert series, Something in the Water, that started in Virginia Beach here, put on by Pharrell.
Okay.
Last year, who is from Virginia Beach. And now the gentlemen, they didn't like how the city of Virginia Beach treated that situation. So they're moving that event up the highway to Washington, D.C. We met the other day with the people putting on that event, and we're collaborating on doing some large events for education purposes next summer. So some things involving vets and music and culture and education. We've also talked about putting together an event entirely for senior citizens, where we teach senior citizens how to become an educated cannabis consumer. So, we're excited about doing this. 10 years ago, I never thought I'd be doing this, but it's funny how life evolves. And, it just feels good to be giving back, contributing to the greater good, and trying to give some other people a chance to get a leg up, because we're not asking for anything other than a true opportunity to just participate. That's it.
Well, if nothing else, you are doing good.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Paul, thank you very much for joining me, man. I really do appreciate it.
I loved it. I had a lot of fun, and look forward to connecting in the future.
Right on. All right. Before we get out of here, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. Finally, if you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com. For Paul McLean, I'm David Manti. This is the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.